All right. So I think we spoke about long range. I was thinking about a bit more. You said basically anything beyond the day. How about just anything beyond the moment? Like just to differentiate between like acting on an impulse now without even thinking about what will happen in the next 5, 10 minutes, hour versus thinking at least into the future in some sense that would be included within long range. Um, so anything
Um,
beyond the moment.
I would still think further. The
Yeah.
reason I
Okay.
think not beyond the moment is because, well, I can easily think of examples of animals that can think at least a day ahead, maybe. They can plan
Yeah.
like where their food will be or know
Right.
that they need to hunt today.
Right.
But it's not like they're going based on what will I need to do for next winter. They'll never be able to. No animal really thinks of
Right.
it that way. It needs to be long range enough that I guess at least you deal with changing when the world changes. Like you can deal with changes as they occur. You can predict or think about or consider things that may change. You may consider that, oh, the crops are different this year, or the weather is different next month than this
Right.
month.
Okay.
Things like that. It's got to be long enough that we're really talking about those things that humans uniquely do, like farming or even hunting or gathering berries for the upcoming winter or something. I mean, that's
Right.
what really characterizes that conceptual way of thinking and really thinking long range, really going beyond even, like really beyond. I can't find really a distinguishing point, but I would say that, I don't know, maybe at least a year would be what would, longer than a year, I would start to consider long range.
Right. Yeah. I mean, thinking long range is in itself an interesting topic because it goes to setting, like, doesn't make sense to set goals that will take you many years to achieve when you're not clear how much you'll actually like the end result in the first place. Like an example would be people who commit to, and I think this is becoming less and less, like people are becoming more aware of it, but going to university to pursue, I don't know, studying medicine because you want to be a doctor, but you don't actually know what being a doctor is like. And so you spend 6 years and your end goal, and you become a doctor, and now you don't like it. Um, and so that's a whole, I don't know how much thinking has been done on that, like thinking properly about setting long range goals when you've got to balance, like, not, what's it called, it's not being like setting some kind of ideal that's detached from reality versus having some kind of iterative process where you set a goal but then you adjust it based on the feedback you get from reality. But if you set some goal that's very, very long range, like, how do you know? It's hard to get feedback and know if you've got to stick to it for the next 10 years or what. Like, like Ayn Rand's goal of becoming someone who wanted to um, write about the perfect man or something like that, or I forgot what her exact mission statement was, but she had that from a young age, right? And so how do you know setting that kind of long range goal is worth it? I don't have an answer to that, but that to me is a discussion that's worth like some thought on, or that's a topic that's worth thinking about, because people often do that. I've done that. Set a
Yeah,
goal and you get there, and it's not what you wanted, or it's not what, once you get there, you actually are, it's not that great.
yeah. I think virtue is supposed to answer how, at least even the uncertainty of what the consequence will be, that it will still be the right thing to do, even if we don't quite know. We just need to know it to orient ourselves towards the long range that whatever the consequence may be, we are in the best situation we can be to deal with it.
Okay, so you're saying that that's actually the kind of discussion that would happen within the context of discussing virtue, speaking of like setting long range goals.
I think so that it can help you at least identify the actions as distinct from the consequences, or that the
Okay.
consequences are, you might not know the exact consequences, but you know the consequences are better than they would be otherwise. That the
Okay.
consequences of acting virtuously are, it doesn't cause negative things. It makes things better, or it helps you attain them, but doesn't necessarily guarantee it, because you can't guarantee how other people might act, or if other people initiate force, or if other
Yeah.
people abuse that, or whatever
Right.
it might be.
Right. Okay. This is so we did actually touch on this on evil, but this was a section on evil. And evil men, though impotent, can disappoint, deceive, betray the innocent. If they turn to crime, they can rob, enslave, kill. Tui is not painted as someone who's like, because here earlier, actually, I should bold it. They talk about evil as the non-achiever, the ignorant, the impoverished, the frustrated, the resentful. But when I think of Tui, I don't think as someone who's like impoverished and frustrated and resentful. He seems quite masterful at manipulating.
Right. I feel that way too.
Yeah. So kind of, to me, that's a lot like, there we go, and logic. Like it's kind of, at least the identification I'm making is that it's contradictory. Tui is an example. But I don't know, the Joker is an example as well from Batman.
Yes.
But whether or not they're real, whether or not they represent something that could be is a different question, I guess. So.
Yeah, I've thought about that somewhat recently, how even characters like Joker are maybe deliberately not even realistic, but there's something about them that makes them more terrifying. That because such a person doesn't exist, imagine if someone thought this way, what horror that might lead to, I think is a lot to it. And it adds an extra feeling, like in the way I mentioned H.P. Lovecraft, like you can't have something that you merely looking at it makes you turn insane. It doesn't make any sense, and it
Right.
is fantastical, and maybe the Joker is fantastical just as much
Okay.
as like Superman might be. I'm starting to at least start to think that we could call these fantastical examples. I'm not sure about
Interesting.
Tui, but at least
Yeah.
say Joker, like you could identify some essential and then add in some imaginary things to increase that terror of whatever he is. It's one to be nihilistic and just ad hoc and just be a true nihilist and not really care. But it's another to be a nihilist, but then be so committed to it that you try to apply your logic to destruction. I don't even know if it's possible in any normal human psychology, but if it ever were done, it would be terrifying.
But so I guess the question is like, so you can have it's almost, but I still wonder though, like uh, if it's like if you read a Greek myth and you just get bored because you're like, yeah, people don't fly around and shoot lightning bolts and just do one thing one day and another thing. It's just like, there's such a disconnect from what you perceive as being possible to be real versus what the story is telling, that you're just bored. And so isn't it the case though that they could be fantastical? I agree with you, and I like that description. But if they're still, if there's some effect they're having on us, mustn't we still on some level believe that to be possible? Because otherwise, why would we not just be bored by, yeah, whatever, this doesn't seem real to me? Like
Well,
I've had that
that's
experience when I read a book with some characters. I'm like, yeah, people can't do this. And
I think
so,
it's more about the essentials about the character,
okay.
the essential, like what makes them fundamentally that way. You could throw in some features that make them unrealistic. I think it's just a matter of which features are you focusing on,
Yeah, okay.
which features are being portrayed. I mean, the Joker ultimately didn't succeed in the movie, so there's still something about the essence of evil that, at some levels, based on lack of any logical view on life or any regard for value.
Right.
So at least that essential might be in Joker. Whether or not such a person really could think logically, we still
Yeah.
have the essential that they
Yeah,
want
okay.
to destroy and disregard value. And that's always terrifying. And here's a concrete that makes it even more real.
Right. Hmm. And do you think this next question we can skip, because since that we've sort of
Yeah.
discussed that with Brandon, but When they say evil is impotent, do they just mean that both good and evil are potent, but only good can create? So we're saying that it's kind of a play on words almost, because both, like both good can destroy, and so evil can destroy as well. Both have the power of destruction, but the difference is that good has the power both of destruction and of creation. And is that why we're saying evil is impotent? Because to me, they both still have power. I'm just confused by this
I
constant
think of it
emphasis on impotence.
the way I think of it in terms of evil being dependent on the good. The
Okay.
evil can't do anything without the good to provide value, to provide
Right.
something created. Either
Right.
they take it, or even just to destroy it, the good has to put it there. The good made it, the evil ruined it. And of course, the
Right.
good can destroy things, but it's not dependent on evil. You don't need evil things to happen to do good. You
Right.
don't need to say, like, I don't know, kill millions of people to then enable good to occur. You're not dependent on,
Right.
say, genocide. You're not dependent on theft. You're creating value. So yes, I
Right.
think that's what you're saying. I don't think it's impotent in terms of can it do something, or impotent in where's the source of its power anyway. Evil
Okay.
can't do anything without the good that created it. Like, you, it doesn't wield anything other than, well, I guess it does. It can wield force, but it isn't.
But that's it. It's just force, and we're saying force itself is not. I mean, I'm saying there's a play on words, because I'm like, I do see force as potent. So I guess there's some
Yeah,
kind of like, there's more to investigate on this
yeah. You just like
interesting.
deflect it or whatever. But yeah,
Yeah.
I think the idea of creation's important here. Creation is like the main thing here. Like, the evil can't create. Like, by
Yeah.
nature, it doesn't create. That's
Yeah.
what Rand would say. If it created something, it wouldn't be. It's either a disvalue or brings you further from life. It's
Right.
not a value in any true sense.
Right. When they talk about, because I think, well, this is Leonard Peikoff, but when he says like they're the honest businessmen are the guiltiest ones, like the workers of a mixed economy whose excess profits and wages are siphoned off into the pockets of sundry incompetents. But like, obviously, this doesn't make sense, because how can you, um, like, this ties into the good is powering the evil, but then, if there are businessmen and they're paying taxes, like, they're not. How are we blaming them? Like, um, they're the ones who pave the road are the guiltiest, or how we like, maybe they just don't have knowledge.
Um, well, I think the only distinction here is that taxes would be distinguished as you're forced to do it.
Yeah.
And I think Rand would usually say that if you're forced to do it, that takes away any moral responsibility on the person doing it.
Okay. But maybe she's getting at, like, they're not even opposing it verbally. They're just
Right.
say
I
they
think
say
this is
that
more about that.
they're willing to, and they're happy to pay even more because they want to give back. Maybe something like that.
Yeah, like, oh, I don't mind paying a little more taxes because we're going to create this great road system, or I
Right.
don't mind doing this because I might be apprehensive of doing it, but I think in the end it's fine.
Yeah.
Or I'll just deal with it and I'll just vote somebody new in place. It's not really any principled opposition
I
or even
understand.
recognition. There's
Okay. But then the broader issue, obviously, is the fact that people aren't thinking in principles, which is an achievement and not easy to do. So,
yeah, at the very least, you need to, if you don't want to just pave the way for evil, just if you don't want to just wave them in, you have to be aware of your principles, or be aware of what you're. It's like a lack of awareness about what you're doing to the world around you.
right.
Like, you paved it without realizing what's on its way over.
Would you say that when she talks about happiness as opposed to joy, this is more of a sense of life type thing? Like, over many years in pursuing certain goals and values rationally, and rational values, um, that you build into yourself this kind of general sense of like things are possible to me, as opposed to an actual emotion. Is that what she's getting at? Like it's not a, you have an emotion which has a mental and physical component, or bodily component, but then you've also got the sense of life type thing, which is like um, the immediate thoughts that come to you, or the associations you have, or what you might immediately imagine is possible in the future. So when she says happiness, it's that kind of sense of life thing she's referring to, right?
Well, sense of life would be wider. It may include happiness. I think that's a
Okay.
bit different. But as far as happiness, I think it usually includes just not only the emotional state of you're in, but also a long range mental state. Say your general conditions towards happiness and whatever neurological condition that is, but also the physical state you're in. Like the actual state, if you evaluate it, if you know you're doing things with regard to your self interest, that would be a way to identify like that needs to be part of it. Like you need to, it's just the overall condition of being in a non-contradictory state, and it necessarily goes with this positive state, which we call happiness.
But then
Joy, I
are
usually
you,
think of as more circumstantial, or well, that's hard to say in English. I don't like the very distinction between types of happiness. In
right?
English, they're quite annoying.
You need German for
Yeah, Japanese does good here because there is a distinction between short range happiness and long range happiness.
Oh, really?
I don't remember the word, but there are distinct words.
Oh, wow, that's interesting. And in other languages?
I think so. I can't think of any
Okay.
offhand.
But in English, it's all mixed?
In English, it's just got happiness and joy, but it's still vague. I think too
Yeah.
much in English about emotions is too vague. Like it's
Wow.
kind of, I don't know.
And in other languages, emotions are not fake?
Well, I think in German, they're usually more specific. I think German's
Could you
pretty good about.
could you give me an example? That's interesting. That I wonder why in English emotions are so fake, but
I don't know. I got many ideas, but I know in German there's Schadenfreude, which is like pleasure at
okay.
your enemy's displeasure. Or even there's a word in German for, I think it came up with psychologists, but it's a word when the non-perception of any color, like it's a mental gray state, whatever that would be, it's there's a specific word in German, Eigengrau. It
The
like refers
non
to
Yeah, go on.
like the non-perception of color. Like what would happen if when you close your eyes, you're not, imagine if there was no input going into your eyes. What would you see? That's a weird distinction to think about and really hard to put into words. There isn't a word for that in English, but not a single word you could describe it. But in German, there is a word for it.
Right. Okay. Oh, that's interesting. Um, and so when you say overall happiness, do you just mean she's referring to someone who is experiencing that emotion most of the time? Is that I'm not sure of the distinction between, because you said it wasn't sense of life. Sense of life is broader.
Yeah,
Um, and so, yeah, what does it mean then to be happy? Is that most days, let's say you're kind of like, oh, I'm happy. Is that what it is?
it's a state of being. It's a mental state. Maybe you could call it a mood, perhaps. What I'm trying to distinguish is that it's a state of being as opposed to a momentary emotion. And I think that's what Rand tries to distinguish, that it's a overall mental and overall psychological condition to your state of being.
I, I can't, I don't know. I can't identify what that would be like. It remains in the abstract for me. Like I wouldn't be able to pinpoint to an overall mental state
Well,
versus
are there any people you've been forgetting the exact definition right now? Are there any people you recognize that you say, oh, they're happy in maybe a long term sense?
Uh, yeah, I guess so. Yeah. It's always mixed though. I can't think of one where I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
that person is really like, I can think some are more happier than others, I would guess, but I still think of it as, um, I yeah, okay. If I had to point it out, I would say, well, I can think of one person who's just had a lot of success in his life in things that he wanted to succeed in, and there's a kind of, but it's more descriptive. I'm not thinking. I would just assume he's happier. He's easier to talk to. He's logical. He's
Yeah.
he's excited about all these things in the future that he's working on. But it's not a. It's hard for me to go. Um, a state of. It's hard to identify what that is. Then what the state of happiness is, because I'm pointing out things that he's pursuing, as opposed to someone who's not pursuing things. I don't know. Anyway, my point is, this is, uh, apart from yeah, I think sense of life, when I thought of this, but
I think sense of life can include things that your sense of life could be a form of happiness. What I mean to say is there are more deep. A sense of life is more particular to the individual. There's not like
right,
you have the happiness sense of life. It's more like you have the Jonathan sense of life, and
right,
only you could have that. But it can consist of happiness.
yeah,
It can
okay,
consist that state of, or rather saying, the achievement of one's values, or even just the achievement. I do think it includes some achievement. So it's part of the what you do when you're reaching towards your values. I mean, the condition of being happy is a condition you're in when you are virtuous, the condition when you're living life by flourishing,
right,
living life according to life as a standard.
right, okay. It's I will move on, but it's definitely still kind of like, uh, not. Let's go with more theoretical, without
Sure.
the concrete references of what that would be like. But
Yeah, I would stick
um,
to that for now then, yeah. Just recognize that it's not valid in your mind, but you have a working understanding.
yeah, um, when they talk about, what is this out of context desire or fear, is that a malfunction of emotions? This is more a question of psychology. Is that some kind of,
He sucks it.
do you think it's a
Let me read
malfunction?
this. Only he sucks it. Only he uses. Malfunction makes me think like there's something wrong with the neurons or something wrong with like something physiological about the brain, which
Yeah,
could exist, but I think it's maybe malfunction more like, say, there's depression or anxiety or OCD. Um, Even that's difficult. So that's too borderline. Let me think of a better example.
but it doesn't need to be someone with OCD. Like, uh,
Right.
anyone can experience out of
Yeah.
context emotions, and then suddenly they disappear after a while. But that, I guess my curiosity was, is this something inbuilt into the emotional mechanism, or is this a issue of premises or like thinking? I don't know, but uh,
Mostly premises, mostly. Or at least
okay,
premises is how you would deal with it. It's how you would treat it. There might be some underlying neurological influence that makes you more
yeah,
likely to experience those fears or desires.
right,
But you don't need to indulge it, of course.
of
And the
course,
indulgement is what is more about the refusal, is the recognizing it and then refusing to obey it, or recognizing that the problem exists and you know how to prevent it.
right.
You're not letting yourself indulge because you recognize what it is.